So we were told yesterday that Wes Streeting was going to be doing the rounds today and he'll be joining us. We're all very excited. After the show, we have our little meeting. I wonder what his announcement's going to be. We'll respond to that.
We knew it was going to be something on social care.
We knew it was going to be something about social care.
Yeah.
But it turns out his announcement is that there is no immediate plans on social care. It's going to be an inquiry, a thorough research to find out exactly what the problems are, and it'll be 2028 until we might see any change at all. That seems like an extraordinary announcement to me.
Just in time for the next election.
Yeah.
So that means that no budget will be spent during this Parliament. That will mean that they'll kick the can down the road, and then they'll have it in time for the next manifesto. But look, I've got no doubts that Dame Louise Casey will do a fantastic review. All of her previous reviews have been thorough. I mean, what she did for the Met was extraordinarily thorough. However, you need social care now. And this is, I mean, it's almost fodder for the Liberal Democrats because this is pretty much their only campaigning issue is care.
I mean, we will ask him when we speak to him after 8 o'clock, but what is exactly the inquiry into? What the problems are, because for heaven's sake we know, or what the potential solutions are? I could see why that still needs to be answered, but do we need 2, maybe 3 years or more before we get those in place?
No, we don't. And every government has had extensive inquiries. We had Andrew Dilnot do a very big inquiry into social care. I think as long ago as 10 years. We've been promised by successive governments. Boris Johnson's government, famously, I think Boris Johnson put it as a high priority that he was going to finally sort out social care. And this all goes to kind of a bigger debate about the future of the NHS. We had an emergency inquiry from this government into the NHS. They gave a very senior surgeon 4 or 8 weeks to produce a report, which he did. And it's all about how you reform. And I think the NHS and social care should be put in one bucket and there should be a genuine reform because we know that the population is getting older. We know that the vast majority of expenditure now comes, as it were, in the last few years of people's lives. That's where the urgent need is needed. That's where families are completely uncertain about how much money they might have to spend, whether they might have to sell the family home and so on to care for their elderly relatives. And you need, I think, a sense of urgency. There is a criticism of the government, which I think is valid, which I don't think is a partisan point, which is it's all very well having won a landslide majority and saying you're going to fix Britain. You can't keep having endless inquiries. You've got to basically put your money where your mouth is, put your policies where your mouth is, and get on.
Will they?
I mean, the problem is they put the creation of a national care service in their manifesto.
Yeah.
They talked about it in 2009, this taking place. Yes, maybe there has been this, huge hole in the budget found, but at least the way to reform, you'd have thought, would have been established before putting it in the manifesto.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is huge politics here, and it may well be that Rachel Reeves' budget didn't help because they've seen the reaction to that. You remember Theresa May basically lost an almost unlosable election with her sensible, I thought, plans for social care reform. She thought she could put them forward because she had nothing at risk in terms of the election results, so she could put forward what might be, plans which would involve people spending money, actually less money potentially than they would under the old system. And she got kiboshed by it. So the politics are so dangerous.
Yeah.
Well, especially after what they've done with winter fuel. I don't think that you can, really go after the pensioners any more than you already have.
And it's not just pensioners. That's the thing about care. We talk about the elderly, and of course we have an ageing population, and elderly people do need social care. But it's also continuing critical care for children, for young people, for anyone who's unlucky enough to get hit by a bus today that then needs care and support. It's a fundamental, really, part of our health service and giving people a right to life, isn't it?
Yeah, and also if you look at what Labour have done to the benefit system, so they've actually been cracking down on that and they're employing a whole swathe of new people to work at the Department for Work and Pensions who will essentially be reassessing people's PIP or universal credit claims. And that is care. That is actually a package of care. So it means that people who might be entitled to a car or need a car from the government because they can't walk might not be able to have it now.
There'll be people at home today whose parents are in care homes or family members in care homes. I mean, they can't wait till 2028 for a decision on how their parents are going to be looked after. Care England have said the people in care today cannot afford to wait any longer. Their lives depend on action now. One thing we do know, and we don't need an inquiry to tell us, is that, and this is own government statistics, there are 131,000 vacancies across adult social care. Now, you know, that's in England. Now, surely, that's just in England, yeah, and surely... what West Street could come on today and announce some kind of scheme, some incentive, some way how they're going to fill that gap.
Well, one of the
that seems to be
proposals was
an obvious
the
way
basic
forward.
wage, wasn't it? £15 an hour,
Yeah.
which already is, you know, you're asking a lot of a carer for £15 an hour in terms of responsibility, but at least that would be a basic wage that would encourage people to come in, and that's not been delivered, has it?
No, and if you remember as well, it was the last Conservative government that actually told carers they weren't allowed to bring their families here anymore. They actually said that they were low-skilled workers and therefore didn't qualify to come and make a life here.
Yeah.
So have Labour got themselves in a bit of a tangle there? Because Labour, they want to appear hard on migration, and yes, we all agree that migration needs to be controlled and those figures need to come down. But by being hard on migration, they're now not able to turn around and say, well, actually, we do need 130,000 people to come from abroad to fill these care vacancies.
Yeah, I think it's probably the categorisation of it. Describing care workers as low-skilled, you know, anyone who's had to have a carer work with one of their family members, I mean, I would say that's probably one of the... It's an extraordinarily high-skilled job. And the fact that a graphic designer can come into this country, bring their entire family, use the school system, but then someone who looks after our elderly or the people who aren't well doesn't qualify, it doesn't make sense to me.
Ed, what would you do now?
Well, this is why
if you were in Cabinet, what would you be doing?
Well, I thought Theresa May actually put forward a very sensible plan.
Remind us of what that was,
in the sense we can't have a national care service on the same basis as we have a national health service, in the sense that nobody pays anything or makes any contribution towards it. And she put forward a very sensible plan which had, you know, if you had savings up to a certain level, you wouldn't pay anything. But if you had savings above that, you would make a contribution. And also the opportunity to have a sort of insurance-based system sitting alongside it so people could put in money during their lifetimes in order to pay for their care, because most of us know it's highly likely that we will need some kind of care towards the end of our lives of some shape or form. And I think people do understand that you cannot create an NHS for the National Care Service from scratch where nobody, regardless of their assets, makes any financial contribution. But I think what is frustrating, and, you know, I agree with Ava that Baroness Casey is a very formidable operator who will produce a great inquiry. But the NHS was created during the Second World War. You know, the Bevan report laid the foundations, and in a country devastated by war in 1945, the NHS was created. We are, at the moment, at peace. We are affluent. We are wealthy. We can put in place proposals. And you, frankly, you have to lead at this.
The insurance system is interesting, isn't it? Because they've tried different ways of doing it. You know, increasing national insurance didn't go down well, but I think people thought, OK, if I'm paying that money specifically to make sure that if I fall ill, if I get injured or I get old, you know, which we all hope to do, then there will be some support there for me. But if that doesn't work, in France they have an insurance system, doesn't it, that you pay in almost immediately, a little bit like you might have a private pension. Because at the moment you have to have so little in assets. 14,250 is one of the figures quoted. Other parts, 23,000. Wales, I think it's about 26,000. My memory's a bit blurred now because I'm not dealing with it directly. And that includes any kind of asset, any kind of saving.
And that's hardly an asset, is it? You know.
Well, you know, most people, if you're running a business, you would have to have money in your business account to pay wages for that. So if you're hit by a problem, then you're not going to get it funded already. So maybe we do have to accept we have to take out insurance.
Sure, I think, but this is what came up repeatedly during the assisted dying debate that we had just before Christmas. It was, why have we not rectified the social care system or created an insurance-style-based system? Why have we just jumped to, oh, no, actually, you can have assisted dying? Because you could potentially put people into the really frightening position of, I can't afford to live, and that is terrifying.
But that's what people feel at the moment. Because they're paying for their own social care. And then in the meanwhile, you've got unpaid carers, you know, a lot of them. I mean, 10.6 million, I should say, sorry, is what Carers UK, it says, are unpaid carers, who are keeping the rest of us afloat.
Absolutely. I mean, this is the point. So, as I say, I mean, Theresa May's proposals actually would have addressed your point, that people with actually quite small amounts of savings would
Are you on the
actually
payroll for Theresa May's reforms this
would be
morning?
better off. And it's a very strange world when I come in and promote Theresa May and premiership and election campaign. But this is the crisis point that we have reached, Ava.
Because you can't get, I don't know if people know, you can't get insurance for care. Because I've tried, having learnt my lesson because of Derek, I thought, right, I better look out for myself, because I'm going to need care,
I didn't
and I'm
realise
not
that.
going to get it.
You can't get it.
I haven't found a place which will cover care. So you can get private health insurance for operations and things you might need.
But there is,
but they're very loath because they know it's huge.
But there is a
Because you could get
fundamental,
sick and
there's a
be decades
fundamental
and be-
problem with politics, and it's been going on for a very long time, which is all governments, in my view, over the last few years, have basically grabbed the headlines and shirked the tough decisions. And it goes way back. There were ways we could have fixed the state pension sort of 20 or 30 years ago, radical proposals. There's no long-term thinking going on. There's no attempt to address the British public and say these are really serious problems that need fundamental fixing. There is you can't have a sensible debate where you can say an NHS that was created after the war, and I've just lauded that creation, may not be fit for purpose. Those structures may not be fit for purpose.
And you make a really good point there, because we are living longer now as well. That's a good thing. That's a good thing.
We live in a totally different country. Even things like prison reform, you can't have a sensible debate about prison.
So basically what you're saying is no party is willing to have on their record that they are the party that instigated the privatisation in some way of the NHS.
And that's exactly, I mean, that's a fair point. And this is why people are unscared. Because that's the easy headline you can get from what I think are much needed reforms. People would say it was privatisation. Labour called Theresa May, wonderful woman, called it a death tax.
Your hero.
My hero called it a death tax when she was proposing her social care.
But wasn't that
reforms.
to do with the fact that people would have to pay out of an inheritance? Is that why they called it the death tax?
Well, they used whatever excuse they could.
OK.
You know, when we, in 1997, Blair talked about 24 hours to save the NHS, there's hugely emotive language, very partisan from both sides on what are actually should be cross-party fundamental issues which go to the very root of how our society works.
This all links in quite nicely with our next story, which is this terrible weather we're now expecting over the next few days. Most part of the country will get some sort of severe cold and ice. In the north, and from Midlands north, there might be some severe snow. We've heard from Jude, it says in Scotland it's going to be really terrible snow. The advice from the NHS, this is the NHS, the health service has urged the public to stock up on food and medication amid warnings of a rise in deaths and risks to the vulnerable, but also saying do not go outside early in the morning or late at night during the snowy weather. I mean, you look
And it lands tomorrow.
And this is like, so the ice and the snow's landing tomorrow. Don't go out too early, but do go out and stock up on medication. Anybody who gets any medication from the pharmacy or your doctor knows it takes about 7 days for that to come in anyway. You know, so you've got to go out and stock up on food. I mean, it seems to be just words, really. We touched on this yesterday a little bit.
But they can't handle the spillover. That's the problem. If someone does get into an emergency, there's potential, like, you know, in areas of the country, they actually can't deal with you. I mean, if you look at over Christmas, there was a part of Wales that actually declared an emergency. They actually had to say, do not call 999 because we can't assist you. You know, services are so threadbare.
These are signs that we are in a crisis. I mean, this is a crisis, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, up to a point. I mean, I think there is an element of personal responsibility. It cuts both ways. I've just castigated politicians for not taking long-term decisions. Maybe, just to make myself really popular, I'll castigate the British public, because there is a habit.
Brilliant. Well done, Ed.
You know, there are those stories you occasionally see in the newspapers of people calling 999 to get directions to the local chippy or whatever. I mean, you know, we do expect a kind of weirdly kind of Rolls-Royce service. We do all, to a certain extent, have to take personal responsibility. When you hear this kind of advice, though, maybe it is, you know, trite and fatuous to say to people it's going to be very cold, the roads, the pavements will be icy, potentially, you know, be careful how you go about your business during the next few days, because it's a very unusually cold severe weather.
I think the other thing that'll land badly is, of course, there will be older people feeling vulnerable. They've been isolated as the most vulnerable in this situation, who will not be able to turn their heating up because of the loss of the winter fuel payment, and that's going to go down very badly, isn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, what would you say? So people could die.
Yeah.
It's very serious, and it's really cold as it is now, and I've got my heating on full blast, but I've got the luxury of being able to afford that. There are many people who are going to be too frightened to turn it on, and that is, you know, the government should be really, really concerned about this.
You said yesterday, I think, Ed, that the first person that died...
Yes.
you know, because of not being able to turn their heating on, which could very well happen this weekend. Let's hope it doesn't. You know, that will be accusations of blood on their hands, won't it?
That's right, and it's a brutal and slightly cynical thing to say, that this government appears to me to be a government that doesn't have any luck or is making its own bad luck. But to have a budget where you cut the winter fuel payment, you're not actually going to save that much money, because lots of people have now taken out pension credit because the message has got through. You get the winter fuel payment if you apply for pension credit, and lots of people haven't in the past. Then you are entering a very severe cold snap. I mean, we were talking about temperatures of -10. And the two are going to be linked for very obvious reasons. And that is going to be extremely bad news for the government.
And they never wanted everyone to get on pension credit. That was just sort of a way to save themselves after they realised it was unravelling.
Should we touch on the front page of The Sun? Saras killer dad slashed with tuna tin lid in prison. We all know this horrific story of Sarah Sharif and the abuse that she was subjected to by her father and her stepmother. And now the Sun are reporting, and we haven't been able to confirm this, that he's been slashed in prison in HMP Belmarsh by 2 other inmates.
Well, there won't be an enormous amount of sympathy from the public for this. I mean, one could say, obviously, that our prisons should be safe. We have a judicial system. People are put in prison and they should be safe. It surprises me that this person isn't in solitary confinement. Normally, where children are involved, those prisoners do not mix with the mainstream prisoners because they are at risk for very obvious reasons. So this is not a surprising story to hear.
I mean, if you've read the testimony, it's so... the evidence, it is so heinous, you can't even repeat it on breakfast television. It is that bad. And if you want to have even a glimpse of the crimes that he committed to that young girl, I mean, go and read it. But you can't repeat it. It's so heinous. Anyway, tough.
There won't be a lot of people that will be crying over that, will there? What do we make of Elon Musk? So, you know, he's had a little sniff at it before, but he's waded in, calling for the release of Tommy Robinson, far-right activist, and accusing Keir Starmer of failing to prosecute child rapists in Oldham in Greater Manchester. I think we've got a little look at his tweet that we can look at on this. You know, should he butt out, to put it less bluntly, or when you look at some of the things British politicians have said about Donald Trump and even Elon Musk himself, they've had their fair comment too. Is it just what we have to take, or is it more dangerous than that? I
think there's two halves of this story, and unfortunately, this bit is sort of the bluster of all of this, is sort of overshadowing the really important part of it, which is that Oldham Council have requested a public inquiry because they say that actually victims weren't heard properly, there wasn't a proper dissection of what went on during the grooming gang scandal, and they don't feel that they can mark their own homework. And Jess Phillips, the safeguarding minister, has said, no, you need to handle it locally. That is an issue on itself, and I would argue there should be a public inquiry because what went on during that time is so bad, and there hasn't been any... none of the recommendations have been implemented, nothing has changed, and there's nothing to say that something as heinous as that won't happen again. The other side of it is the bluster on social media that is overshadowing it, and Kemi Badenoch has also tried to weigh in on this morning, which I think is very interesting when you consider that they were in government just a couple of months ago. So if they really cared, they would have actually done something about it.
And they said there shouldn't be a public inquiry, and there has been a report. There are 20 recommendations which haven't been actioned, which could be actioned, which is maybe where we should start. But I think Elon Musk's, you know, he's the world's richest man. He's got one of the most important, if not the most important, kind of news platform he's owned. And I think he should take some responsibility. I don't think you should amplify somebody like Tommy Robinson and try and put forward that he is somehow a legitimate human being or somehow a political prisoner. And it is very, very depressing. I said earlier, this government appears not to have any luck. You know, if you would say to an incoming British Prime Minister, by the way, the world's richest man with 200 million followers and a huge platform is going to come after you day after day. You need that, like you need a hole in the head.
And just to add, on this issue, and I think it's really important to say, on this issue of street grooming amongst the Pakistani community, 14 years ago, I did a documentary for the BBC. I was the first to talk about the subject. Andrew Norfolk had written a lot of stuff in the Times. And at that point, I decided to do it because, for the very reason what's happening now, it was hijacked then by the BNP and the far right to really demonise my community, the Pakistani community. So I put my hands up to the BBC and said, look, I want to go and see what's going on. And you know what? There are issues. Of course there are issues. And the community know there are issues. But as the reports since have come out, said these happen in all communities.
Exactly.
You know, and actually, grooming takes place far more in white communities. Of course it would, because there are more white people in this country. It's happening in those areas where there is a disproportionate number of Pakistani people. And the inquiries have said this, where populations are greater amongst Pakistanis and who work in the nighttime community as well, as taxi drivers, work in takeaways, where a lot of these young girls were. And part of the problem was, and I spoke to victims, I remember, you know, we were all in tears listening to her. And her issue at the time was the police didn't believe her. So there was lots of issues. The police didn't believe her, or there was a feeling that these young white girls deserved it. Because they were hanging around...
Because they were poor, they had no connection.
Their parents had neglected them, they're on the streets. What are you doing there at 1 o'clock in the morning on a high street anyway, befriending these
100%.
men? You know, so there's a lot going on here, but the inquiry has clearly said that it's not just happening amongst Pakistanis. And I worry, yes, have a public inquiry, but perhaps we should have a public inquiry more widespread into, you know, sexual abuse across the whole of our society.
Organised sexual abuse.
We had last week, we had it in the church. I mean, that is still never been exposed. I'm waiting for someone to go and do a documentary on that. And I did my documentary 14 years ago. So I think there's a danger that Musk and Tommy Robinson's politicise this, and that makes things a lot worse, and you never get to the problems.
But the specific problem that Oldham Council are talking about is that, you know, a lot of these men were they were working or they were entwined with the council, and so they don't feel that they can actually properly mark their own homework. They can't do... if everyone is so entwined, how do you root out the
I agree. The Rotherham inquiry was an independent inquiry.
No, but Adel, you've got an unanswerable point. You've got an unanswerable point, which has to be addressed, which is a lot of this debate is being used to demonise a particular community in our country. And actually, when you step back, what problem are we trying to solve? That is, how do you protect vulnerable young women who, in communities where a group of men have decided that they can groom them and abuse them? And your point exactly about the police is a point well made, because if that is one of the problems, and we've been through this in terms of how we have moved on in terms of how rape allegations are treated, if one of the problems is that police either can't recognise it or willfully dismiss it, that's a massive issue. So how do you get a system that reacts appropriately and promptly and effectively when these issues, and are able to spot them when these issues arise? And it should be colour blind, to put it bluntly, community blind.
Yeah.